This is my next shelf. It's going to be a little bit hard to get to because it's partly blocked by my record player. Up here I have the Expo 67 guidebook. In 1967, Montreal, Quebec held the World's Fair. I have the Canadian Constitution by Adam Dodek. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms, 30 plus years of decisions that shaped Canadian life by Ian Green. Interculturalism, A View from Quebec by Gerard Bouchard. Interculturalism, A View from Quebec by Gerard Bouchard. ABC for Book Collectors. ABC for Book Collectors by John Carter. Better Homes and Gardens, New Garden Book. The Battle of London, Trudeau, Thatcher, and the Fight for Canada's Constitution by Frédéric Bastien. The White and the Gold by Thomas B. Constein. This is a Quebec history book. French Canadians, Volume 1 and 2 by Mason Wade. I have read Volume 1 in its entirety, but not Volume 2. Okay, now, down on this shelf, I have 100 Years of Solitude by Garcia Marquez. Now, this is a library discard, but the research I've done indicates that it's an English first edition 10th printing or something like that. It's worth absolutely nothing because of the library binding. Then I have another copy of 100 Years of Solitude by Marquez. Love in the Time of Cholera, also by Garcia Marquez. The Autumn of the Patriarch. The General in His Labyrinth. Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote. I love the movie from the 60s, and I think the book was even better. And then in here, I have A Tangled Web by L.M. Montgomery, Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, Anne of Avonlea, Anne of the Island, Anne of Windy Poplars, Anne's House of Dreams, and Anne of Ingleside. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Of Love and Other Demons by Garcia Marquez. George Orwell's Burmese Days, and Down and Out in Paris and London by Orwell. And if we go a shelf lower, sorry it's getting kind of dark down here, I have The Colony of Unrequited Dreams by Wayne Johnson, Tempest Tossed, and Leaven of Malice by Robertson Davies. The third book in the Salterton trilogy is lying somewhere else at the moment. For Whom the Bells Toll. For Whom the Bell Tolls by Hemingway. This isn't the most attractive copy of the book, but it was cheap at Kohl's. Up here, Hugh McLennan, A Writer's Life. The Workers' Revolt in Canada, 1917 to 1925. Readings in Contemporary Rhetoric. Rhetorical Theory and Introduction. And I have a couple issues of the Paris Review. And if we go down to the very bottom shelf down here, I have, this is neat, a 1976 Eaton's catalog. For those of you who don't know, Eaton's was a Canadian department store, kind of like the Canadian version of Sears. It no longer exists. I have Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I started to read it, but it's a monster of a book. And then I have a biography of Stephen Leacock, humorist and humanist. Swallows and Amazons by Arthur Ransom. I picked this up recently. There's a couple of pages missing, but it was really cheap. I enjoyed reading this when I was about 10 or 11. And then I have Enid Blyton's adventure books. I read these over and over again when I was in elementary school. The Castle of Adventure, The Island of Adventure, The Valley of Adventure, The Circus of Adventure, The Sea of Adventure, The River of Adventure, The Ship of Adventure, and The Mountain of Adventure. Okay, so this is the final part of my bookshelf tour. Once again, I'm sorry for the bad lighting. This is actually on a shelf underneath my desk. I have a Webster's Dictionary, Dictionary of Canadian English, Better Homes and Gardens, Homemade Bread Cookbook, Rose Basics, The Ontario Gardener, All About Roses, The New Encyclopedia of Gardening, Japanese Flower Arrangements, Root, America's Gardens and Wildflowers of America. Then I have the Norton Anthology of Theory and Criticism, 2nd edition. I really lucked out. I actually picked this up at a secondhand shop last December. They were having a bag sale, fill a bag for $5. So I tossed this into a bag with about 10 other books and a purse and a whole bunch of other stuff and got it for $5. And that is crazy expensive brand new. Then I have 4 volumes of the Book of Knowledge. This is a children's encyclopedia from the 1950s. It's a Canadian encyclopedia. Copyright in Canada, 1950. I really wish I had all the copies, but these were the only ones I saved out of a dumpster back when I was in high school and volunteering at a thrift store. Apparently these weren't worth selling. In volumes 1 and 2, there's actually a note or a preface written by the Prime Minister at the time. Then I have pull this out. The 19th Century, Its History, Progress, and Marvelous Achievements. The Wonderful Story of the World for 100 Years. I paid $4 for this at an antique shop when I was visiting my grandparents in New York State last summer. Printed in 1900. This is basically a big history book. Down near the floor, I have Elementary Practical Botany. This is Interesting little book. I have Poisonous Plants of the United States and Canada by John M. Kingsbury. The Nature Library, Butterflies. Roses, Their Culture and Management. I actually read all the way through this book last spring. It's quite interesting, and there's a lot of interesting and useful information. It's from the 1940s, but that doesn't mean it's completely out of date. As you can probably tell by a few of the books in this portion of my tour, roses are my favorite flower. Rose also happens to be my middle name. The New Garden Encyclopedia, illustrated. This is a beautiful one. I collect garden books not so much because I'm going to read them, but because some of the older ones are extremely beautiful and interesting. And this one occasionally comes in handy if I need to look up a term, although this is 2015, I Google. Here's a little gem. Stalking the Wild Asparagus Field Guide Edition by U.L. Gibbons. Questions about wildflowers. Flowers, A Guide to Familiar American Wildflowers, a Golden Nature Guide. This is interesting. Canadian Etiquette Dictionary by Claire Wallace. It's a Harlequin book. So, it tells you things about addressing envelopes, the correct way to take a seat in a church, funerals, funeral Christmas cards, funeral coffins, flowers sent after funeral, death notices, grave markings, handkerchiefs, handshakes, members of provincial legislature, how to address them properly. I suppose there was a time when books like this were actually useful. I have a book of Mediterranean food. It's a Penguin Handbook by Elizabeth David. Kitchen Metrics by Agriculture Canada. This would have come out probably around the time that Canada was switching from the imperial to the metric system. Chatelaine Cookbook, the definitive Canadian cookbook. Discovering Canadian Cuisine, a modern guide to cooking and entertaining. Compliments of the Union Gas Company. This was put out in 1967. Development of American Industries, Glover and Cornell, Revised Edition. The Universal Webster's Dictionary, Webster's New World Dictionary, Le Chemin du Roi. This is a French book. I can't read it, but I have it. It's a library discard. Picked up somewhere. French Canada in Transition by Everett C. Hughes. This is a French-English and English-French dictionary. And McDougall's Etymological and Biographical Dictionary with aids and numerous appendices. Michael Crummey's Glore. Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Walt Whitman's The Complete Poems. The Island by Aldous Huxley. Land by Derek Hall. My Sunshine Away by Emma Walsh. Longing for Justice, Higher Education and Democracy's Agenda by Jennifer S. Simpson. Reviving Social Democracy, The Near-Death and Surprising Rise of the Federal NDP. And The Rosie Project by Graham Simpson. And these aren't very interesting up here, but in the top of my closet, behind my Gone with the Wind box set, I have a couple sets of encyclopedias. I have the World Book 1967 encyclopedia set and the Canadiana encyclopedias. I don't have the complete set of those. On the top, I have some books of stamps that I inherited from my grandfather. And I have a Centennial Food Guide, The Canadian Look, Great Canadian Sports Stories, The Making of a Nation, Great Canadians, and Remember Yesterday.